Enjoy this flight, Brad. It's the last one you'll ever work. I whispered the warning as Port Authority officers slammed me against the bulkhead, the cold steel of handcuffs biting into my wrists. Brad Halloway, the senior purser, just smirked, satisfied he had removed a disruptive passenger to free up Seat 1A for his colleague. He thought he had won. He had no idea that the $5 billion contract needed to save his airline from bankruptcy was sitting in the Hermes bag he tried to force into the overhead bin. By the time he lands in London, I won't just be a passenger pressing charges, I will be the owner of his debt, his plane, and his future. The rain at JFK International Airport was relentless, hammering against the reinforced glass of Terminal 4 like a million tiny fists demanding entry. Inside the exclusive Meridian Airways Diamond Lounge, however, the storm was nothing more than ambient noise, a soft gray backdrop to the clinking of crystal flutes and the hushed murmurs of the global elite. Vivian Clark sat in a high-backed leather wing chair, her posture impeccable, her focus entirely on the tablet, resting on her crossed knee. At 42, Vivian was a force of nature disguised in tailored silk. She was the founder and CEO of Aurora Holdings, a venture capital firm that had quietly become the backbone of sustainable energy and aerospace infrastructure in the Western Hemisphere. She didn't look like the typical tech bro or the old money geriatric usually found in these lounges. She was a black woman with sharp, striking features, wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, and she exuded a type of silence that screamed power. She was tired. It had been a 3-week sprint across Silicon Valley closing deals that would redefine hydrogen fuel cell technology. The flight to London tonight wasn't a vacation. It was the final lap. She was meeting with the European regulators in the morning. More sparkling water, Miss Clark. Vivian didn't look up, but her lips curved into a polite, practiced smile. No, thank you, Sarah. I'll be heading to the gate shortly as boarding for 882 commenced. Just starting now, ma'am. They're calling Group 1. Vivian nodded, sliding her tablet into her Hermes tote. She stood up, smoothing the front of her jacket. She had flown Meridian Airways for a decade. In fact, 9, she was currently holding a contract that Meridian's CEO, Richard Sterling, had been begging her to sign for 6 months, a $5 billion infusion to update their aging fleet with Aurora's new green engines. The contract was digital, sitting in a secure server awaiting her biometric signature. She planned to sign it over the Atlantic, a poetic gesture. She walked to the gate, bypassing the growing line of economy passengers. The gate agent, a harried-looking woman named Brenda, scanned her boarding pass. The machine beeped a pleasant green. Welcome aboard, Miss Clark, Seat 1A. Thank you for being a Diamond Key member. Thanks, Brenda. Vivian walked down the jet bridge, the cool air of the tunnel hitting her face. She stepped onto the plane, turning left towards the first-class cabin. This was her sanctuary, or at least it was supposed to be. Standing at the entrance of the first-class galley was the senior purser, a man named Brad Halloway. Brad was in his late 40s, with hair dyed a suspicious shade of jet black, and a uniform that was fitted just a little too tightly around the waist. He was checking the manifest on a clipboard, frowning. "Good evening," Vivian said, stepping past him towards Seat 1A. Brad looked up. He didn't smile. His eyes did a quick sweep of Vivian from her hair to her shoes, and the frown deepened. It was a look Vivian knew well. It was the look that asked, "Do you belong here?" "Boarding pass," Brad said, his hand extending, abruptly blocking her path. Vivian paused. She had her phone in her hand, the QR code still visible. She held it up. Seat 1A. Brad didn't scan it. He squinted at the screen, then looked back at his clipboard. 1A is reserved for a V. Clark. Are you V. Clark? I am Vivian Clark. Yes. Brad let out a short, dismissive breath through his nose. We've had some system glitches today with upgrades not processing correctly. Let me see your physical ID. Vivian felt the first prickle of irritation. She flew this route twice a month. The flight crew usually knew her drink order before she sat down, but Brad was new to her. "My ID is in my bag," Vivian said, her voice calm but firm. "I've already been through TSA and the gate agent. My ticket is valid." "Ma'am, I need to verify that you are the ticket holder. We have a lot of people trying to sneak into first class lately. Just show me the ID and we can move on." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and gross. Sneak into first class. Vivian locked eyes with him. She moved slowly, deliberately. She set her tote on the empty seat of 1A, unzipped the inner pocket, and retrieved her passport. She handed it to him. Brad opened it, looked at the photo, looked at her, and then flipped through the pages. He took an agonizingly long time. Behind Vivian, a tall white man in a gray suit seat 1B walked in. "Good evening, Mr. Henderson." Brad's demeanor instantly shifted. His face broke into a sycophantic grin. "Welcome back. Can I get you a pre-departure scotch? Make it a double, Brad." Henderson chuckled, squeezing past Vivian as if she were a piece of furniture. Brad didn't ask for Henderson's ID. He didn't even look at his boarding pass. Vivian watched the exchange, her blood temperature rising 2 degrees. "Are we done here?" Brad snapped the passport shut and handed it back, his smile vanishing as he turned back to her. "Fine, take your seat. But you'll need to put that bag in the overhead bin. It's too large for under the seat. It fits perfectly under the seat. I do it every flight." "Not on my flight," Brad snapped. "Overhead bin now. We're blocking the aisle." Vivian took a deep breath. "Pick your battles," she told herself. "You have a $5 billion deal to sign. Don't let a petty tyrant ruin the flow." She lifted the tote and placed it in the overhead bin. She sat down in 1A, buckling her seatbelt. She took out her phone and sent a quick text to her assistant. "Michael, flight crew is spicy tonight. Might need a drink before we take off." She didn't know it yet, but she would never get that drink. The trouble started 10 minutes later. The cabin was filling up. The air was getting stuffy. Vivian had her noise-canceling headphones on, reviewing the final clauses of the funding agreement. She felt a tap on her shoulder, a sharp, aggressive tap. She slid the headphones off and looked up. It was Brad again. He was looming over her, his face flushed. "I need you to move," he said. Vivian blinked. "Excuse me, I need you to move seats. There's been a double booking." Vivian looked around the cabin. First class was full. "Move where back to economy. Row 34. We have a deadheading pilot who needs a seat in first class for rest requirements. And you're on a discounted fare type." Vivian laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Discounted, I paid full fare for this ticket. Brad, I am a Diamond Key member. You don't bump full fare passengers for deadheading crew. That's not policy. I'm the senior purser and I decide the policy on board this aircraft." Brad hissed, leaning in closer. "Now I'm not going to ask you again. Gather your things and move to 34B or you're getting off the plane." The cabin had gone quiet. Mr. Henderson in 1B was watching over the rim of his glass. A woman in 2A, a young influencer named Jessica, who was already live-streaming her trip, turned her phone discreetly towards the commotion. "I am not moving," Vivian said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly quiet. "I have a meeting in London that determines the future of this airline, quite literally. If you want to bump someone, find a volunteer. I am staying in this seat." Brad straightened up, his hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from rage. He wasn't used to being told no, especially not by someone like her. "You're being disruptive," Brad announced loud enough for the business class cabin behind them to hear. "I am sitting in my assigned seat," Vivian countered. "You are refusing a crew member's instruction. That is a federal offense." Brad reached for the intercom phone on the wall. "Captain, we have a situation in first. Passenger in 1A is becoming belligerent and refusing to follow safety protocols." Safety protocols. Vivian shook her head in disbelief. She pulled out her phone and started recording. "Brad," she said, the camera lens focused on his name tag. "State clearly why you're asking me to move." Brad saw the phone and swiped at it. his hand making contact with her wrist. "Put that away. You do not have permission to film me." "You just touched me," Vivian said, pulling her hand back. "You just assaulted a passenger. I did no such thing," Brad yelled. "Get off this plane now." He stormed towards the cockpit door. Moments later, the captain, a weary-looking man named Miller, poked his head out. He didn't look at the situation. He just looked at Brad. "What's the problem?" Captain Miller asked. "She's drunk, she's aggressive, and she's refusing to move for the relief pilot." Brad lied, his voice trembling with feigned victimization. "I don't feel safe flying with her," Captain Miller sighed. He didn't investigate. He didn't ask Vivian for her side. He just wanted to take off. "Call Port Authority. Get her off." Vivian sat frozen. The injustice of it was a physical weight on her chest. She looked at Henderson in 1B. "Sir, you saw what happened." "He hit my hand." Henderson looked away, suddenly finding the ice in his scotch. "Fascinating." "I don't want to get involved," he mumbled. 2 minutes later, the heavy thud of boots echoed on the jet bridge. 3 Port Authority officers boarded. They were big, imposing, and clearly briefed by Brad before they stepped on. "Ma'am, let's go," the lead officer said, reaching for her arm. "Do not touch me," Vivian said, standing up. "I am leaving, but I want it noted that I am being removed under false pretenses." "Yeah, tell it to the judge," the officer sneered. He grabbed her upper arm hard. "I said, don't touch me." Vivian recoiled. That was the trigger. "Yay, you!" The officer slammed her back against the bulkhead. "Stop resisting." "I am not resisting," Vivian cried out as they wrenched her arms behind her back. The cold steel of handcuffs clicked onto her wrists. The humiliation was searing. Vivian Clark, who controlled billions in capital, who had dinner with senators, was being manhandled like a criminal in front of 50 people. As they dragged her down the narrow aisle of the first-ass cabin, Brad stood by the galley, arms crossed, a smug, satisfied smirk plastered on his face. "Have a nice flight," Brad whispered as she was shoved past him. Vivian stopped. She planted her feet, forcing the officers to halt for a split second. She looked Brad dead in the eyes. The chaos in her mind settled into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. "You have no idea what you've just done," she said softly. "Enjoy this flight, Brad. It's the last one you'll ever work." "Keep moving," the officer shouted, shoving her forward. As she stumbled out of the plane and into the jet bridge, the heavy aircraft door slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate and the airline's. Inside the plane, Jessica in seat 2A stopped recording. Her thumb hovered over the upload button on TikTok. She added a caption, "Meridian Airways just assaulted a black woman for sitting in first class. You all need to see this." She hit post. The holding room at JFK's Terminal 4 security office was a windowless box painted a depressing shade of beige. It smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Vivian sat on a metal bench, one handcuffed to the rail. They had taken her phone. They had taken her bag. For the first 20 minutes, she just breathed in through the nose, out through the mouth. She had to compartmentalize the rage. Rage was useful, but only when focused. Uncontrolled rage was a fire that burned your own house down. Focused rage was a laser. The door opened. A younger officer, Officer O'Malley, walked in. He looked uncomfortable. He held a clipboard. "Miss Clark?" he asked. "That is my name. May I have my phone call now? Or are we skipping that constitutional right too?" Ali scratched the back of his neck. "Look, the airline is pressing charges. Trespassing and interference with a flight crew. It's serious." Trespassing, Vivian repeated. "The word tasting like ash on a flight I paid $12,000 for. They say you were drunk and belligerent." "Breathalyze me," Vivian challenged. "Right now, do it." Ali paused. He looked at her. Really looked at her. He saw the cut of her suit. He saw the terrifying calmness in her eyes. He had seen drunks. He had seen Karens. This was neither. "I checked your ID," Ali said quietly. "Vivian Clark, the venture capitalist, Aurora Holdings. You can read, Vivian said. That's a good start. Now, Officer O'Malley, I'm going to give you a piece of advice that will save your career. Get your supervisor. Get the Port Authority chief and get me my phone because in about 10 minutes my legal team is going to realize I haven't checked in for my flight and they are going to track my phone to this room. When they get here, they won't be knocking. Allie hesitated. I can't give you the phone, but I can get the chief. He left. 5 minutes later, he returned with a burly, red-faced man. Chief O'Connor. O'Connor looked annoyed to be pulled away from his dinner. Miss Clark O'Connor grunted. You caused quite a scene. Uncuff me, Vivian said. You're in custody. I am a CEO of a Fortune 500 equivalent firm. I was assaulted by your men and the airline staff. I have not been read my rights. I have not been breathalyzed, and I have not been allowed counsel. Every second I remain in these cuffs adds another 0 to the lawsuit I am filing against the NYPD and the Port Authority. O'Connor stared at her. He was a bully, but he wasn't stupid. He recognized the tone of someone who had the Attorney General on speed dial. He motioned to Allie. Take them off. Allie unlocked the cuffs. Vivian rubbed her wrists. There were red welts forming. Good evidence. My phone, she demanded. O'Connor handed it over from a plastic bag. You're not free to go yet. We're waiting for the airline rep to sign the formal complaint. Vivian turned on her phone. It buzzed and buzzed and buzzed. A deluge of notifications, messages from Michael, messages from her lawyer. But the thing that caught her eye was a Google alert trending on Twitter. Hashtag boycott Meridian trending on TikTok. Hashtag Meridian assault. She opened Twitter. The video was everywhere. Jessica's video. It showed everything. Brad's aggression, the way he swiped at her, the calmness of Vivian's voice, and then the brutal way the officers dragged her out. Views 4.2 million. Time elapsed. 50 minutes. Vivian looked up at Chief O'Connor. A small, cold smile touched her lips. You're waiting for the airline rep, she asked. I don't think they're going to show up. Why not? Because, Vivian said, turning the screen around to show him the view count. They are currently trying to figure out how to stop their stock price from free falling. She dialed a number. It rang once. Vivian, my God, where are you? It was Robert Vance, her chief legal officer. I'm in a holding cell at JFK, Robert Meridian Airways, Flight 882. I was dragged off. It's on video. I see it. The whole world sees it. CNN just picked it up. Are you okay? I'm furious. Robert listened to me closely. The funding deal with Meridian, the $5 billion for the Green Sky Initiative. Yes, we have the signing scheduled for tomorrow. Kill it, Vivian said. There was a silence on the line. Vivian, that deal is their lifeline. Without that cash injection, they can't service their debt on the new Boeings. They'll be insolvent within the quarter. I know Vivian said, her voice hard as steel. Kill the deal. Draft a press release. I want it released within the hour. State that Aurora Holdings does not partner with companies that violate human rights and assault passengers. Use those words. Consider it done. I'm sending a team to get you out. Vivian hung up. She looked at O'Connor, whose face had gone pale. He had heard the $5 billion part. Am I free to go? Chief Vivian asked. Or do you want to be part of the lawsuit too? O'Connor opened the door. Get out of here. Vivian stood up. She smoothed her jacket, picked up her bag and walked out of the cell. She wasn't going to London. She was going to war. Richard Sterling, the CEO of Meridian Airways, was asleep in his penthouse overlooking Central Park when his world began to collapse. It was 11:45 p.m. His phone, resting on the mahogany nightstand, began to vibrate with the specific, relentless pattern reserved for catastrophic emergencies. He groaned, rolling over and fumbling for the device. The caller ID read Sarah Jenkins, AFP of Communications. Sarah. Richard, his voice thick with sleep. This better be about the quarterly earnings report. Richard turned on the TV. Sarah's voice was high-pitched, bordering on hysterical. And check your email right now. Sarah, it's midnight. Richard, we are trending #1 worldwide. It's bad. It's the worst I've ever seen. Richard sat up, the adrenaline kicking in. He grabbed the remote and flicked on the TV to CNN. The banner at the bottom of the screen was bright red. Breaking news: Meridian Airways accused of racial profiling and assault, and there, playing on a loop, was the video. Richard watched in horror. He saw the cramped confines of his flagship first-class cabin. He saw his senior purser, a man he recognized as Brad Halloway, an employee with a history of minor HR complaints that had been swept under the rug, sneering at a woman. Then he saw the woman. Richard froze. The blood drained from his face so fast he felt dizzy. He scrambled out of bed, dropping the phone. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He knew that face. He had that face framed on his office wall in a photo taken at the Davos Economic Forum. He had spent 6 months courting that woman. He had ordered custom wines for the signing ceremony scheduled for tomorrow in London. Richard. Sarah's voice tinny from the phone on the carpet. Richard snatched the phone up. "Sarah, tell me that isn't Vivian Clark." "It's Vivian Clark," Sarah confirmed, her voice breaking. And Richard. She was the one with the $5 billion green sky contract. "Get me the flight manifest," Richard roared, pacing the room in his boxes, sweat prickling his forehead. "But get me Captain Miller on the sat phone immediately. Why wasn't I notified?" The pilot didn't know who she was. The purser logged it as an unruly passenger removal. They followed standard protocol for a drunk disturbance. She wasn't drunk. Richard screamed, throwing a crystal coaster across the room. It shattered against the wall. "She's a strict vegan teetotaler. She drinks sparkling water and green juice. You idiots! You absolute morons!" His computer pinged. A high-priority email notification. Subject: immediate termination of letter of intent. Aurora Holdings from Robert Cole, General Counsel, Aurora Holdings. To Richard Sterling, CEO, Meridian Airways. Richard stumbled to the desk. He opened the email. It was short, brutal, and legally binding. "Dear Mr. Sterling, effective immediately. Aurora Holdings is withdrawing its offer of $5.2 billion in Series B funding for Meridian's fleet modernization. Furthermore, we are initiating a hostile short position on Meridian stock NYMDA effective at pre-market open. Miss Clark has instructed me to inform you that she does not do business with organizations that sanction the assault of their patrons. She also suggests you find a new carrier for your return trip from London, as she will personally ensure no Meridian aircraft touches the tarmac at any airport where Aurora holds fuel contracts. Regards, Robert Cole." Richard stared at the screen. $5 billion gone in the span of an hour. But the hostile short position was the nail in the coffin. Vivian Clark wasn't just walking away. She was betting against them. She was signaling to the entire market that Meridian was dead meat. "Sarah," Richard said, his voice trembling. "Call the board, wake them all up, and get me the number for the Port Authority. I need to get those charges dropped before she sues us into bankruptcy." "The charges were already dropped," Sarah said quietly. "She walked out of the precinct 10 minutes ago. She gave a statement to the press outside. TMZ was there. What did she say? She said, 'Meridian Airways chose the wrong passenger to bully. Tomorrow I'm buying their debt.'" Richard sank into his chair. Buying their debt. That meant she intended to own them. She wasn't just going to sue them, she was going to hostile take over the entire airline just to fire Brad Halloway personally. "Connect me to Flight 882, Richard whispered. "Now." High above the Atlantic Ocean, the cabin of Flight 882 was dark. Most passengers were asleep, lulled by the drone of the engines. In the first-class galley, Brad Halloway was feeling good. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, chatting with a junior flight attendant, a young woman named Chloe. "You have to be firm with them," Brad said, gesturing with his cup. "These people think that just because they have a credit card, they own the plane." She was clearly on something. Did you see her eyes glazed over? Chloe looked uncomfortable. She had been in the back galley during the altercation, but something about it felt wrong. She seemed pretty calm. "Brad, are you sure she was drunk? Trust me, sweetie. I've been flying for 20 years. I can spot a troublemaker from the gate. I did the airline a favor. Captain Miller will thank me when we land." A soft bing echoed through the cabin. The Wi-Fi light on the ceiling flickered from amber to green. The satellite connection, which had been spotty, was back online. In seat 1B, Mr. Henderson, the man who had ignored Vivian's plea for help, woke up. He couldn't sleep. He felt a gnawing guilt in his gut. He reached for his phone to check his emails. He opened Twitter. His eyes widened. His jaw went slack. The video was everywhere. And the comments were vicious. But what stopped his heart was a tweet from his own company's HR account, tagged by hundreds of users who had identified him from the video background. "At Henderson Logistics, we are aware of the video circulating involving our CEO Mark Henderson on Meridian Flight 882. We do not condone bystanders ignoring injustice. The board is reviewing the situation." "Oh my God," Henderson whispered. He looked up. Across the aisle, Jessica in seat 2A was awake. She was glaring at the galley. She held up her phone, showing Henderson the screen. It was a live count of Meridian's stock plummeting in the Asian markets. Then the murmurs started. The Wi-Fi had woken the cabin up. Screens were glowing in the dark. People were whispering, pointing. "That's him," someone whispered from row 3. "That's the guy." He kicked off Vivian Clark. "Is he insane?" Brad stepped out of the galley, smiling his customer service smile. "Can I get anyone a water? A warm cookie?" "Get away from me," Jessica snapped, pulling her legs up. "Don't come near me." Brad blinked, his smile faltering. "Excuse me, your trending Brad A. man in seat 4C called out." He held up his iPad. "Check the news." Brad frowned. He pulled his personal phone from his pocket. He turned it on. He had 400 missed text messages. His Instagram was blowing up with death threats. His Facebook wall was a war zone. "Racist, power-tripping loser. Say goodbye to your job." Brad's hand started to shake. He scrolled and saw a headline. "Vivian Clark pulls $5 billion funding from Meridian after viral assault video." $5 billion, Brad squeaked. Suddenly, the cabin phone rang. It was the distinct 3-chime ring. The code for pilot to senior purser. Urgent. Brad picked up the receiver, his hand trembling so hard he almost dropped it. Cabin Holloway. Captain Miller's voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the tired, indifferent voice from before. It was the voice of a man who was watching his pension evaporate. "Come to the cockpit now, Captain. I can explain." Now Miller screamed so loud that Henderson could hear it from seat 1B. Brad hung up. He looked at the passengers. 20 pairs of eyes were fixed on him. There was no respect in them anymore, only disgust. He walked the long walk to the cockpit door. He punched in the code. The door clicked open. Captain Miller and the first officer were sitting there. Miller didn't turn around. He held up the sat phone handset. "It's for you," Miller said, his voice deadly calm. "It's Mr. Sterling." Brad took the phone. He put it to his ear. "Mr. Sterling, sir, shut up." Richard Sterling's voice was a cold whisper over the satellite link. "Don't speak. Don't breathe. You are going to listen." "Yes, sir. You have single-handedly destroyed this company, Holloway. In 45 minutes, you undid 50 years of reputation. Do you know who that woman was? I thought she owns the company that builds the engines on the plane you're flying," Richard screamed. "She was my guest, and you had her arrested." Brad started to cry. Actual tears. "I was just following protocol. Your protocol is revoked. Here is your new protocol. You are relieved of duty immediately. You are not to speak to a passenger. You are not to serve a drink. You are not to wear that jacket. Sir, take off your uniform jacket, Holloway. Give it to the captain. You are to sit in the jump seat for the remainder of the flight. And when you land in London, when you land, pray. Just pray, because I'm flying out on a private jet right now to meet you there, and I'm bringing the lawyers." The line went dead. Brad stood there, the silence of the cockpit deafening. Captain Miller turned around. He extended his hand. "The jacket, Brad. Captain, please give me the damn jacket." Brad slowly unbuttoned his navy blue blazer with the gold stripes on the sleeve. He stripped it off, revealing his sweat-stained white shirt underneath. He handed it to Miller. "Get out," Miller said. "Sit in the jump seat by the lavatory, and don't let me see your face until we're on the ground." Brad stumbled out of the cockpit. He walked back into the first-class cabin, Sam's jacket looking small and pathetic. As he walked past row 1, Mr. Henderson spoke up. "Hey, Brad." Brad stopped looking down. "I'd ask for a scotch," Henderson said, his voice dripping with ice. "But it looks like you're not working here anymore." Jessica in 22A laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. Brad lowered his head and walked to the back to the small, uncomfortable fold-down seat next to the toilet. He sat down, strapped himself in, and stared at the floor. It was going to be a long 6 hours to London, and he had a feeling the landing would be much, much worse. The descent into London Heathrow was smooth, but inside the cabin of Flight 882, the atmosphere was suffocating. The usual post-landing rustle, the clicking of seat belts, the snap of overhead bins, the impatient shuffling of feet was entirely absent. A heavy, morbid silence hung over the first-class cabin, broken only by the low hum of the ventilation system. Brad Halloway sat in the jump seat near the forward lavatory, his knees pressed against his chest. He had spent the last 6 hours staring at the gray industrial carpet, his mind racing through a frantic loop of denial and bargaining. "It's just a misunderstanding," he told himself, his hands trembling as he gripped his knees. "I'll explain that she was aggressive. I'll file a report. The union will back me. I've been here 20 years, but deep down beneath the layers of delusion, he felt the cold, hard stone of dread in his stomach. He knew with sickening clarity that the life he knew was over. The plane taxied for what felt like an eternity, finally lurching to a halt at a remote gate at Terminal 5. The seatbelt sign pinged off with a cheerful chime that felt mockingly bright. "Ladies and gentlemen." Captain Miller's voice crackled over the PA system. It was not his usual smooth pilot voice. It was strained, tight. "Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We have been instructed by ground control to hold all passengers. Authorities will be boarding the aircraft shortly." A collective gasp rippled through the rows. In 1B, Mr. Henderson pulled his coat tighter around himself, refusing to look towards the galley. Jessica in 2A held her phone up, live streaming the finale of the drama she had helped ignite. Brad squeezed his eyes shut. Authorities. That meant police. The forward cabin door hissed and swung open. The damp, chilly air of an English morning rushed in, smelling of jet fuel and rain. Brad braced himself for the sight of high-visibility police vests. But it wasn't the police. Stepping onto the plane was a woman who looked far more dangerous than any constable. She was dressed in an immaculately tailored charcoal wool coat, her hair pulled back in a severe, razor-sharp chignon. She carried nothing but a slim tablet. Flanking her were 2 men who were clearly not airport security. They were private protection, broad-shouldered, wearing earpieces, and moving with the silent efficiency of predators. The woman walked past the stunned flight attendants, her heels clicking rhythmically on the galley floor. She stopped directly in front of the jump seat. "Mr. Halloway?" she asked. Her voice was cool, crisp, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was a voice that billed by the hour. Brad looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Yes. I am Sarah Thorne, Chief Legal Counsel for Meridian Airways European Division. You are to come with me immediately." Brad scrambled to unbuckle his harness, his fingers fumbling with the latch. Is this an arrest? Do I need a lawyer?" "You are currently an employee under internal investigation," Sarah said, stepping back to give him room to stand. "Whether you need a criminal lawyer will depend entirely on how the next hour goes, but Mr. Sterling is waiting for you." Brad's blood ran cold. "Mr. Sterling, the CEO. He is in the red carpet suite, and he is not alone." Move, one of the security guards grunted, placing a heavy hand on Brad's shoulder. They didn't march him through the jet bridge into the terminal. That would have been too dignified. Instead, they guided him down the external metal stairs directly onto the tarmac. The wind whipped at Brad's thin white shirt. He was still without his uniform jacket, making him shiver violently. Waiting at the bottom of the stairs was a black Range Rover with tinted windows, its engine idling with a low, menacing growl. The guard shoved Brad into the back seat, sliding in next to him. Sarah Thorne took the front passenger seat. "Where are we going?" Brad asked, his voice barely a squeak. "The terminal is that way." "We aren't going to the terminal," Sarah said, not looking back. The car sped off, weaving through the complex choreography of the airfield. They passed luggage carts, fuel tankers, and massive A380s driving towards the far perimeter of the airport where the private hangars stood. The isolation was terrifying. Brad realized he wasn't just being fired. He was being erased. The Range Rover slowed and turned toward a massive white hangar. The heavy steel doors were already rolling up. The car drove inside, and the doors rumbled shut behind them, cutting off the morning light. The hangar was cavernous, smelling of oil and ozone. In the center sat a magnificent machine, a Gulfstream G700 private jet. Sleek and white, its engines ticking as they cooled. It was a predator of the skies, a machine that cost more than Brad would earn in 10 lifetimes. Standing near the nose gear of the jet were two figures. One was Richard Sterling. The CEO of Meridian Airways looked like a man who had survived a shipwreck. His tie was undone, his expensive suit was rumpled, and his face was a mask of sheer unadulterated panic. He was pacing back and forth, wringing his hands. The other figure stood perfectly still. It was Vivian Clark. She had changed out of her travel clothes. She now wore a navy blue Powers suit that looked like armor. She held a porcelain cup of tea, looking at the Gulf Stream as if considering buying a second one. She looked fresh-rested and terrifyingly calm. The car doors opened. Brad was pulled out. His legs felt like jelly. He stumbled on the concrete floor, his shoes scuffing loudly in the echoing space. "Mr. Halloway!" Richard Sterling barked, rushing forward. His voice echoed off the metal walls. You absolute idiot!" Brad flinched. "Sir, I can explain. Explain!" Sterling screamed, his face turning a blotchy purple. "You want to explain how you wiped $2 billion off our market cap in 6 hours? Do you have an explanation for why the FAA is opening a discrimination probe? Do you know who this is?" He gestured wildly at Vivian. Vivian turned slowly. She took a sip of tea. Her gaze landed on Brad, heavy and physical. "I didn't know." Brad sobbed, tears finally spilling over. "I didn't know who she was. She didn't look like a Diamond member." "And there it is," Vivian said. Her voice was soft, but it carried perfectly in the acoustics of the hangar. "That is the problem, Brad. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice." She took a step closer. Brad wanted to back away, but the security guards were behind him. "You looked at me," Vivian continued, "and you saw a stereotype. You saw a black woman in a nice seat and decided I was a fraud. You saw a white man in a suit and decided he was authority. You didn't check my ticket because of policy. You checked my ticket because of your prejudice." "I was just doing my job," Brad whispered, though he knew it was a lie. "No," Vivian corrected him. "You were abusing your power. And the dangerous thing about people like you, Brad, is that you only respect power when it looks like you. If you had known I was a billionaire, you would have offered me champagne. Because I was just a passenger, you offered me handcuffs. You're done." Sterling interrupted, desperate to show he was on her side. "Halloway, you're terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct. I've already instructed HR to contest your unemployment claims. We are stripping your pension. I have spoken to the contacts at the major airline alliances. You are blacklisted. You won't even get a job driving a luggage cart." Brad fell to his knees. The concrete was cold and hard. "Please, Mr. Sterling, I have a mortgage. I have 2 kids in university. This will ruin me. You ruined yourself." Sterling spat. He turned to Vivian, wiping sweat from his forehead with a shaking hand. He forced a pathetic, ingratiating smile. "There you see, Vivian, he's gone. The cancer is cut out. We've issued the apology. I've personally tweeted it now. Surely we can put this behind us. The Green Sky funding the contracts are ready." Vivian looked at Sterling. She handed her empty teacup to one of the guards. "You think this is about the funding?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "Well, yes," Sterling stammered. "The $5 billion. We need it to survive the quarter. We've done what you asked. We fired him." Vivian signaled to Sarah Thorne. The lawyer stepped forward, opening her briefcase and pulling out a thick-bound document. She placed it on the hood of the Range Rover. "I didn't come to London to sign the Green Sky Partnership, Richard," Vivian said. "I canceled that deal while I was in the holding cell." "Then why are you here?" "I'm here to sign the acquisition papers," Vivian said casually, as if ordering lunch. Richard froze. The color drained from his face completely. "Acquisition? What acquisition?" "I bought the debt," Richard Vivian said. "All of it. While you were flying here panic-calling your PR team, my analysts at Aurora Holdings were buying your distressed bonds from Deutsche Bank and J.P. Morgan. They were panicked by the stock crash you caused, so they sold them to me for pennies on the dollar." She picked up a heavy fountain pen from the folder. "I own the airline, Richard," she said. "I own the planes. I own the hangars. I own the debt. And legally speaking, I own you." Richard made a choking sound. You can't. It's already done. This signature is just the formality." Vivian leaned over the car hood. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper was the loudest thing in the world. Scratch, scratch. It was the sound of an empire falling. She capped the pen and stood up. As the new owner, Vivian said, turning to Sterling, "My first act is to restructure management. You're fired, Richard. For cause. Your lack of oversight created the culture that allowed him," she pointed a finger at the weeping Brad, "to exist. Your golden parachute is denied. You can't do this." Sterling shrieked, his composure shattering. "I built this company and today you sold it," Vivian replied. "Hand your keys and your badge to Sarah. You're trespassing on private property." Vivian turned on her heel and walked towards the stairs of her jet. "Where are you going?" Sterling screamed after her, his voice cracking. "We have to transition. You need me." Vivian paused at the top of the stairs, framing herself against the gray English sky. She looked down at the 2 men, one kneeling, one standing, both broken. "I have a meeting in Paris," she called down. "I'm taking my airline." She gestured to the open hangar doors where the public bus stop was visible in the distance. "You 2 can take the bus." 6 months later, the morning sun over Heathrow Airport didn't just illuminate the tarmac. It gleamed off a fleet of aircraft that looked nothing like the tired, debt-ridden metal birds of the past. Where the Meridian logo, a jagged, aggressive red M, had once sat there, was now something elegant, understated, and commanding. The fuselage was painted in a deep matte slate gray, a color that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it cheaply. On the tail fin, a stylized golden wing curved upward, catching the dawn, and written in a clean, modern serif font across the side was a single word, Aurora. Vivian Clark stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her corner office in the newly renovated global headquarters. The space smelled of fresh espresso and ambition. She wasn't just the CEO of a venture capital firm anymore. She was the chairwoman of the board for one of the largest transatlantic carriers in the world. The acquisition had been brutal, swift, and absolute. The media had called it the hostile takeover of the century, but Vivian preferred to think of it as a corrective measure. She turned from the window as the heavy oak doors opened. Michael, her trusted assistant who had been with her through the fires of Silicon Valley and the trenches of Wall Street, walked in carrying a leather-bound portfolio. He looked tired but victorious. "The Q3 reports are in," Vivian, Michael said, placing the folder on her glass desk. "And you're going to want to sit down for this." Vivian remained standing, smoothing the lapel of her navy blazer. "Give me the headlines, Michael. I have a board meeting in 20 minutes. Michael opened the folder, unable to suppress a grin. Revenue is up. Not just a stabilization bounce, but real growth. We're tracking 15% higher than Meridian's best quarter in the last decade. The Green Sky engine integration is 3 months ahead of schedule, which has cut our fuel costs by nearly 40%. Wall Street is calling us a unicorn in the aerospace sector. The stock price has tripled since the acquisition. Vivian nodded, slowly absorbing the numbers. It was vindication quantified in black ink. But money had never been the primary motivator here. "And the customer satisfaction index?" she asked. This was the metric that actually mattered. "That's the biggest jump," Michael said, tapping a graph with a steep upward curve. "We went from the bottom 10% to the top 3. The rebrand is working. But it's the culture shift that's driving it. The new blind hiring initiative for cabin crew has completely changed the demographic of our staff. We have the most diverse crew in the industry, and the bias training program, the one you designed personally, is being cited as the gold standard by the International Air Transport Association." Vivian walked over to the desk and ran her hand over the report. 6 months ago, she had been dragged down an aisle in handcuffs. Now she was setting the standard for how millions of people traveled. It proved that dignity wasn't just a moral imperative. It was a superior business model. "Excellent," Vivian said quietly. "But there is still work to do. Success makes people complacent. I want us to audit the regional hubs next month. No stone unturned." Michael nodded, making a note. He hesitated for a moment, shifting his weight. "There is one other section in the briefing. Vivian, the Legacy Matters file." Vivian's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened slightly. Legacy Matters was their internal code for the fallout regarding the previous administration. It was the file on the men who had tried to break her. "Go on," she said. Michael flipped to the back of the portfolio. "Let's start with Richard Sterling. The shareholder lawsuit against him for gross negligence and fiduciary irresponsibility went to court last week. The judge was not lenient. He's been stripped of his severance package entirely. To cover his legal fees and the clawback penalties, he's liquidated his assets. The Hamptons estate was auctioned off on Tuesday. It went for under market value, and the penthouse listed. He's currently staying in a service department in Queens. His reputation in the sea-white world is radioactive. No board will touch him. He is for all intents and purposes retired involuntarily." Vivian felt a quiet sense of closure. Sterling had been a man who believed his wealth insulated him from consequences. He had learned that wealth is fluid, but reputation is forever. "And Mr. Holloway?" Vivian asked. She didn't need to say the name loudly. The memory of his smug face, the way he had smirked, as the police grabbed her, was still etched in her mind. Michael cleared his throat. "We kept tabs as requested. Brad Holloway is currently employed at Luton Airport, but not airside. He's working the night shift at a budget rental car kiosk, the one located in the remote parking lot, not the terminal. It's minimum wage, mostly dealing with angry tourists whose reservations were lost." Vivian pictured it, the man who had treated first class like his personal thief, now standing in a cold, fluorescent-lit booth at 3 a.m., getting yelled at by strangers over compact cars. It was a poetic circular justice. He was now trapping himself in the very service hell he had inflicted on others without the power to call the police to save him. "Does he know?" Vivian asked. "Does he know that I check?" "No," Michael said. "He's just another face in the crowd now forgotten." "Good," Vivian said. "Keep it that way. He doesn't deserve the attention of being my enemy. He's just a lesson in the history books now." She checked her watch. It was time. She picked up her bag, the same Hermes tote that Brad had tried to force into the overhead bin. "Thank you, Michael. Send the report to the board. I'll see you at the signing ceremony." Vivian walked out of her office and down the long corridor of the headquarters. The walls were lined with black and white photography of the new Aurora fleet and portraits of their staff smiling diverse professional. As she reached the elevator, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. It was a text message from her son Luke. "Hey, Mom, just saw the new commercial during the game. The one with the slogan, 'Respect is the destination.' It gave me chills. The guys were talking about it. Proud of you." Vivian stopped. The relentless drive, the late nights, the stress of the takeover, it all settled into a warm, glowing ember in her chest. She typed a quick reply. "Thanks, honey. Love you. See you for dinner Sunday. I'm making that pasta you like. Vegan version for me, obviously." She stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors slid shut, she caught her reflection in the mirrored steel. She saw a woman who had been tested and had refused to brake. She walked out of the building and into the waiting car. The driver, a polite young man named David, opened the door for her. "Where to, Miss Clark?" "Terminal 5, David," she said, leaning back into the leather seat. "I have a flight to catch." "Passport ready," David joked lightly. Vivian smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. "Always," she said. "But I have a feeling the boarding process will be a little smoother this time." The car pulled away, merging into the traffic of a world that Vivian Clark had reshaped in her own image. The airline was hers. The sky was hers. And most importantly, her dignity remained untouched, soaring higher than any jet engine could ever take her. So what is the lesson here? It's simple. Be careful who you step on because you never know who they might become or who they already are. Brad Holloway and Richard Sterling learned the hard way that true power isn't about shouting the loudest or wearing a uniform. It's about character resilience and the ability to turn a setback into a comeback. Vivian Clark didn't just win a lawsuit. She rewrote the rules of the game. If you enjoyed this story of high-altitude justice and billion-dollar revenge, please smash that like button. It helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder that karma is always watching. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next